All right, let's jump right into it. We're doing a deep dive today on something that's been all over the news, um, free speech, the Holocaust,
Mhm.
and this comment from CBS host Margaret Brennan that, well, let's just say it's stirred up quite a bit of controversy.
Yeah, she definitely threw a little fuel on the fire, that's for sure.
So this whole thing, it really all started with VP JD Vance's trip to Germany. He was
Mm.
there for the Munich Security Conference.
Right, right.
And during his speech, he really kind of let loose about what he sees as, like, I don't know, way too much censorship going on in Europe,
He even went so far as to say that it's a bigger threat to the West than Russia or China, you know?
which is, well, that's a bold statement.
It is, especially coming from a U.S. vice president in Germany, of all
Yeah,
places.
you got to figure that was going to raise some eyebrows.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not like it stopped there.
Yeah.
He also had this meeting with a leader from a right-wing German political party, which, that just added more fuel to the fire.
Yeah. But what really set the internet ablaze was this comment from CBS host Margaret Brennan. She was interviewing Senator Marco Rubio, and she said, and I'm quoting directly here, well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty, it's a loaded statement, to say the least. And it brings up a lot of questions. I mean, was Nazi Germany really a case of free speech gone wrong?
It's tricky.
Did it actually lead to the Holocaust? Or is that oversimplifying a very complex event?
It's tough to say. To really understand like the weight of what Brennan said and the reactions it got, we need to kind of look at the historical context.
For sure. I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. People might have different ideas about what free speech really meant in Nazi Germany and how it all connects to the Holocaust.
Yeah, because I mean, when we talk about free speech, right? We're talking about the right to express your opinions without fear of being censored or punished by the government. But, well, Nazi Germany was definitely not a place where you could just say whatever you wanted.
So maybe it'd be helpful to kind of unpack what life was actually like under Nazi rule. Like, what freedoms did people have or, well, didn't have?
Right. I mean, for starters, any opposition to the Nazi Party was crushed. And I mean, crushed brutally and quickly. We're talking about banning political parties, trade unions, and any organization that seemed like a threat to the regime. Newspapers, forget about it. Radio stations, completely controlled by the Nazis. If you even thought about speaking out against the government, you could end up in prison. Or worse, sent to a concentration camp, maybe even executed.
So you couldn't just, like, I don't know, stand on a street corner and start criticizing Hitler.
Not if you wanted to stay alive. And it's really scary how the Nazis used propaganda. Like, they were masters at manipulating people, spreading all this misinformation and demonizing anyone who they're considered an enemy, especially, Jewish people.
So going back to Brennan's comment, it almost sounds like she's suggesting that if there had been more open debate, more people speaking out against what was happening, maybe the Holocaust could have been prevented. But, I mean, what you're describing paints a pretty different picture. It sounds like the Nazis were very, very good at shutting down any kind of opposition.
Yeah, and that's what makes this whole debate so complicated. On the one hand, you've got free speech, which is, like a fundamental principle of democracy. But then you have this historical example where the absence of free speech was a major factor in this horrific genocide.
It's a tough one. And Brennan's comment really hits a nerve because it forces us to think about the limits of free speech. Are there times when it needs to be restricted, to prevent something truly awful from happening?
Now, to be fair, I don't think Brennan ever explicitly said that free speech caused the Holocaust. Her comment, I think, was more about how free speech, or the lack of it, can be used as a tool by these, authoritarian regimes.
It's Senator Rubio who really went after her for that statement, right?
Right. Yeah, he did not hold back.
Yeah.
He basically said flat, there was no free speech in Nazi Germany, period. His argument was that blaming the Holocaust on free speech was not only inaccurate, but, actually kind of dangerous because it distracts from the real problem, the Nazi regime and their ideology.
And that's a really important point. How much importance should we place on the role of free speech, or the lack of it, when we're trying to understand events like the Holocaust?
Exactly. Because if we try to oversimplify things and say, well, the Holocaust happened because there wasn't enough free speech, we miss all the other factors that were at play, factors that are way more complex and nuanced.
Like the systematic dehumanization of Jews, the rise of nationalism and anti-Semitism, the failure of other countries to step in and stop it.
Right, all of that. And this debate isn't just about history, it's about how we think about free speech today. Because if we buy into this idea that free speech, or the lack of it, can lead to genocide, what does that say about us? What does that say about our own societies?
Makes you think, does it mean we need to be more careful about censorship? Or are we in danger of overreacting and silencing legitimate dissent?
That is the question, isn't it? There's no easy answer. But I think, whether you agree with her or not, Brennan's comment has forced us to face this uncomfortable truth. Free speech, even though it's essential for a healthy democracy, it's not without its risks.
And figuring out how to balance that need for open debate with the need to protect people from hate and violence. That's a challenge. It's a challenge we're still trying to figure out. So where does this leave us? We've spent this deep dive talking about free speech, or the lack of it, in Nazi Germany. And, we've looked at how it connects to the Holocaust and this debate that Margaret Brennan's comments sparked.
It's interesting to think about, the impact a statement like that can have on how people see things.
Yeah, it's more than just, some academic debate. It really shapes how people understand history and their views on free speech, today.
Definitely. Brennan's comment, it brings up some strong feelings and anxieties. I mean, for some people, it probably just confirms their fears about the dangers of too much free speech, how it can be used to spread hate and violence.
And then for others, I bet it feels like someone's trying to change history or downplay how serious censorship really is.
For sure, which is why it's important to really think about these issues, and understand all sides of the argument.
So for someone listening to us trying to wrap their head around all of this, what would you say are the key takeaways?
I think the first thing is remembering that history is complicated. We can't just accept these simple explanations. The Holocaust was a terrible tragedy, and it had many, many causes. You can't just point to one thing like free speech or the lack of it and say that's why it happened. It's just not that simple.
Makes sense. We can't boil it down to just one thing.
Exactly. The second thing is that words matter. The way we talk about these historical events, it shapes how people understand them. Brennan's comment, whether she meant to or not, started this debate about free speech and historical atrocities. And that debate, it's still going on.
It definitely shows how careful we need to be. When we're talking about sensitive topics, we need to be mindful of the words we use and how they might affect people.
Absolutely. And lastly, I think it reminds us that this whole debate about free speech, it's not over. It's a conversation we need to keep having, especially today with all the challenges around online hate speech, misinformation, and censorship.
Yeah, this affects all of us. We can't just ignore it.
You're right. And as you keep learning about these issues, I'd encourage you to be critical. Don't just accept everything you hear. Look for different perspectives and be open to questioning your own assumptions.
Well said. This is a deep dive. This has been fascinating. Definitely given us a lot to think about. It's a good reminder that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It shapes who we are, and what our future will be, and understand that it's essential for all of us.